So, the next one we have is a half an hour video. I feel like I need a drink for these. And we're watching them all, and then a couple of funnies at the end. Did Mace Windu really beat Palpatine? Finally answered 8 days ago. I'm pretty sure it's already been answered, bro. But let's see what you have to say.
Greetings, Acolytes, and welcome back to the channel. We're here with another longer form discussion video. I'm again joined with the Archivist today.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Glad to be back.
So
Okay,
the topic
that's why it's
today is
longer.
one of the most heavily debated ones in all of Star Wars. I feel like I say that a lot, but with this, it is very true. And that is the duel between Palpatine and Mace Windu. And first off, we want to thank everyone that suggested that as a discussion topic in the comments, and we'll definitely do our best to continue with this format and take a more free-flowing, in-depth look into the lore. But we appreciate you guys watching the lightsaber form video. But essentially, the topic is, did Mace Windu defeat Palpatine legitimately? Or was Palpatine throwing the fight in an attempt to vilify Mace Windu, if you will, to vilify the Jedi from the perspective of Anakin, and to usher in the coming of Darth Vader in the full turn by making the Jedi out to be the legitimate, antagonists in the war and the individuals responsible for the corruption of the galaxy. Mace Windu at this point to Anakin represents everything wrong with the
This is such a fan art. Why is there a Basilisk war droid he's stepping on?
Jedi Order, which plays out perfectly for Palpatine, and he is able to put Mace Windu on.
And what? Wait, this must be AI generated or something, because what the heck is his hand doing?
A hypothetical trial in Anakin.
And the stormtroopers.
Dies by throwing this fight and by showing Anakin that not only are the Jedi going to take over, but the Jedi, Mace Windu, who sits upon the council, is going to strike down Palpatine out of line with the Jedi Code, if you will. So you have one side of the people that say this is perfect for Palpatine's plan, and this is all orchestrated beforehand. Palpatine throws that fight to get himself in the perfect positioning. And then you have the other group of people who say that Mace Windu's Vapad, or Vapad, however you want to pronounce it, has...
Vapad is how I pronounce it. Vapad, I guess, would make more sense, but I've always pronounced it Vapad. I think it sounds cooler.
...grown so powerful and so perfected that he is able to pull from Palpatine's own darkness, an endless well, seemingly, of darkness, and he uses that in conjunction with some other feats that we'll discuss a little bit later in today's discussion, but that the duel itself is a legitimate victory for Windu and likely would have just resulted in his victory alone, very heavy-handedly. It is not a greater manipulation by Palpatine. It is legitimate. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to the Archivist, and first I find it fitting that we discuss the background and the philosophy behind the original filmmaker's intention, the original filmmakers being the individuals that choreographed the duel, and of course George Lucas. So this isn't the in-lore explanation, if you want to term it that way, but this was the original intention of the filmmakers and the genesis of who won the duel. So
I think the intention was that it was always going to be something that people questioned and talked about and theorized over. I don't think there's one good answer, if I'm to say that, because there will always be a bit of like, well, Palpatine orchestrated everything. I would offer the third opinion, though, is I think that Palpatine would have been surprised by Windu enough that he didn't know how much of an amp Vapad would give him, because he had no way to gauge that, because there were no real big dark side force users that Windu had fought that are on the same level as Sidious. And at the same time, we have Grievous beat Windu, essentially, or Windu knew that he couldn't defeat Grievous. because his form relies heavily on the amp that he gets from the dark side to be able to match that level of competency. But I think if Anakin hadn't turned up, Sidious would have pulled a 180 and got out of it. And wouldn't Mace have been able to predict it and go back? Who knows? Because he would have still tried to deceive with the I'm too weak type thing. And then Mace was obviously quite intent on feeding off the dark side and possibly would have even turned to the dark side. Who knows? Became the new Sith. But yeah, that sort of thing.
Oh, my friend, what did you discover?
So whenever I was looking in the behind the scenes of the making of this scene, right, I noticed something that's actually pretty interesting, and that I'll just kind of put it as a thesis here. It was the original filmmaker's intention that Mace Windu won this duel. And it's interesting to me that they decided to do this because Palpatine in lore today has become so much stronger than what he used to be. And what I mean is that with all the new content that's come out since the release of Revenge of the Sith, Palpatine's character and his power level has evolved far beyond what the original filmmaker's vision for him was. It was said by the producer, I don't know his name, George Lucas and Nick Gillard, who is the stunt coordinator of all the lightsaber duels, that Palpatine can be matched and defeated only by Yoda, Mace Windu, and Anakin Skywalker before he got into the Darth Vader suit.
Yeah, so obviously Palpatine was on the losing end of that part, and I think the savagery of the part would have surprised him because he didn't have a way to measure it.
You know, following that logic, it seems that Mace was able to match Palpatine in his office, and it was not an easy victory by any means. The disarm that he got was high difficulty and completely circumstantial. And I know we're probably going to be mentioning this and going way more into depth in a moment, but one of the biggest arguments that Palpatine threw the fight is that he only loses the moment Anakin enters the Senate chambers. So clearly the argument is that he sensed Anakin coming in, let himself be disarmed, so the moment that Anakin entered the office, he sees Mace leveling his lightsaber at Palpatine's throat. Interestingly, in almost all of the original versions of the scene, Anakin was actually present for most of, if not all of, the duel between Mace and Sidious. And there was even a cut of the movie where Anakin threw Palpatine his lightsaber. And you can see in the movie, there's actually a blooper where sometimes you can see Ian McDiarmid wielding Anakin's hilt. Because from the original cut,
that's fun.
The original version of that scene. So that kind of,
I did not know that.
And so that kind of.
So I was just pulling up on the side the Revenge of the Sith novel for reference later, just out of interest. So, yeah.
You know, I don't want to say it completely throws out the window the theory that Palpatine threw the fight because he sensed Anakin coming in, but I mean that is definitely a good argument against it.
Well, the whole thing of how you see how the scene plays out. If he kept using his lightning, he would have just fried himself. At the same time, it only made him drop the mask. And I think that's been confirmed that he only dropped the facade of being better looking, and then he went actually back to his true form of being looking all horrible and evil.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have to make a decision as fans, right? Do we pick the original intention of the scene by George Lucas and the producers and the choreographer, or do we pick what the lore has given us?
That's a good question. So I think that goes into the discussion about separation of art from the artist. So whatever the artist's intentions, people will interpret the art as it is. And with the expanded universe, George Lucas talked extensively to people made sure that to approve or disapprove of certain parts, and had it line up with his vision in the parts where it really mattered. So, yeah.
Today. And I don't think that it's really irrefutable to say that Palpatine in the lore eclipses Mace Windu's power. Yeah, I think that that's something that we can all agree on.
Yeah. Well, Mace Windu was the only one that could fight him to that extent. The others were Jedi Masters as well, very talented, very powerful Jedi, and they just got dropped in seconds. While Sidious didn't really like lightsaber combat, as in Darth Plagueis, he was still very, very good at it. And with the Force scream at the start and all that, sinking into Vapard, and it was the only thing that really saved Mace.
But again, in terms of the filmmakers, although Palpatine is this ultimate Sith, he is not the ultimate power that, you know, we sort of perceive him as now. George Lucas, you know, quite famously did not like the Emperor's Return originally in Legends continuity. He doesn't even like the character of Mara Jade at all.
That's false. Sorry. I have the quote somewhere. But off the top of my head, it was an interview with Tom Veitch, and I think Tom Veitch has said this on Facebook as well as in an interview on Sales Underworld for the first point, to say that George said it was okay for the Emperor to come back because his original intent was for Vader to come back and be a threat again. But then George okayed the cloning of Sidious. So first of all, he must have not disliked it so much he didn't approve of it in Dark Empire. The second point of him not liking Mara Jade was a skit, a comedy skit. He didn't like her metropolitan look, was part of when they were picking a model and stuff. But he approved Mara Jade as Luke's love interest, especially by the time of Hand of Thrawn. And there's the Union comics printed in that, and we know that George Lucas looked at the comics. And if George really disliked her that much, he wouldn't have approved of her. That's the thing. George had veto power over everything in Legends continuity, as they call it, or the expanded universe. And he wouldn't have approved it if he didn't like it. He disapproved of plenty. Tales of the Jedi is a good one. Right at the start of Tales of the Jedi, with the origin of the Sith was explained, and they had a completely different origin written up. And that's in one of the letters to the editors in the single issues. And George said, no, that's not how it happens. This is how it happens. And that's how we get the origin of the Sith as told in Tales of the Jedi.
George Lucas famously wanted Luke to remain unmarried. So, in terms of that, and sort of giving that perspective, there are things in the lore that contradicts what George Lucas desired and intended. That is just fact. And that's something that we have to.
There were certain tenets put in place when they started the expanded universe, guidelines for them to go by, and they've said about it. And of course things have gone differently to how George would have done it. I'll say it that way. Because you have multiple authors writing in the same space, all in one continuity, and the different ideas jumbled together, the different ideas come and all of that. And George famously has also said there's nothing that he wants to tell past the original saga, the 6 movies. So while he looked at it and okayed and said, okay, what's possible and what's not, what do I like about this, what do I not approve of, it's very much a thing of I feel like that's big information there just to drop out of conversation. When they say they've been doing research behind the scenes of Revenge of the Sith, they should do their research on what happened with the expanded universe, because there's so much where there's misinformation spread about, oh, George didn't like this or that, but then the expanded universe did it anyway. And like, yes, George changed his mind as well, but also he approved it to start with, so he can't complain. And then it's part of the continuity, and it developed as it went, and that's how it is. A lot of the old Marvel run was probably something that George went, I don't care as much about that. It seems to be the attitude of Lucasfilm at the time too, of like, once Heir to the Empire started, that's when they really wanted to care about the continuity. But it was also a very new thing for them to go, let's have all these authors doing the things, like have different authors writing stories in the same continuity. Anyway, I go on a rant about this.
Accept, because at this point there are so many individuals who have worked on Star Wars and who have contributed to it. George Lucas is the biggest contributor, obviously. He's the man that came up with all of these characters. But the fact of the matter is that there are parts of the lore that disagree with what Lucas said.
If you're going to say what Lucas said, it depends when you asked him. Let's be honest. Because you can ask him, oh, do you want to do a sequel trilogy? And at one point he said, yeah, he had treatments for 9 films. But then later on, like in the Ultimate Visual Dictionary that I have, on whichever page that was, I've mentioned it a time before at one point, he says that no, he doesn't want to do he sort of has story treatments, but then he doesn't really want to do them. There's nothing he wants to tell past those movies that he's already done. That's, I think, 2012, isn't it? It's in the Ultimate Visual Guide. It's edited, mostly written by Ryder Wyndham, but it was... Let's give the actual quote, shall we? But no, actually, I don't need to. I've said it before. It's on the website. So there you go. CallumsCantina.com. CallumsCantina.com. But yeah. If you want to talk about what he says, there's a lot of contradictory statements at times. But the main thing is he already approved it.
Is it an outright wrong explanation to say Mace Windu won this battle completely legitimately, or is it wrong to say Palpatine threw the fight in an attempt to, reach out to Anakin?
It's not wrong to have an opinion. Fancy that. We don't always have to be in a right box or a wrong box. And there's multiple interpretations of things. Okay, I'm going to pull this up now, so I'm actually going back to topic. So Vapard had Shatterpoint as well. It's not just Vapard. This is the Revenge of the Sith novel. Just pulling up the digital version for reference. And I should make the text bigger so you can all read it. Here we go. Nice and easy to read. And then... how far are we? Wow, I made the text bigger and then it really shifted where it was. Yep, here we go. So the way that it ends is Mace had... where was it? It's a further along here. So Mace was that sunk into Vapard that the dark energy, the dark side was moving back and forth past him, doing all of that. And the fight would have... Where is it? So merging the part, swallowed by it, he no longer truly existed as an independent being. Was a channel for darkness. He reflected the fury upon its source as a lightsaber. Does stuff. Neither did he have power over it. That's where I think that Mace would have turned to the dark side if he had survived the fight with Sidious. That would be an interesting idea. Mace as a Inquisitor. Oh no, that does that. Yeah, impasse, which might have gone on forever if Vapard were Mace's only gift. So at a certain point in time, he was evenly matched with Sidious with his Vapard. And this is the novel, which was written, it's an EU book, basically, because it adds in deleted scenes and stuff, the canon to the EU, but maybe not the new canon. But then he does have Shatterpoint, in which he found a lot of fault lines in the Shadow's figure. He chose the largest fracture and followed it back to the here and the now, and it led him astonishingly to a man standing frozen in the slashed open doorway. So Shatterpoint, if Anakin hadn't been there, would it have given him an opening? We don't know, but I guess there may have been a way for him to find something. But as of the novel, there was no clear defeat of Sidious. Which I find that novels are a clearer transfer of information and intent. And Matthew Sover worked with George a lot to make sure that the novel was accurate, to present how it would be. But it's good to debate either or, I think.
Neither of those is inherently wrong, which is what makes this argument so compelling. But we as fans have to make a decision of what do we prefer. I prefer in the lore, and my headcanon is that Palpatine intentionally threw the duel to appeal to Anakin. That is my own headcanon because of all of the lore that I have, delved into with Palpatine, his immense power, and studying Mace Windu and his immense power. There is no part of me that feels as if Windu to Palpatine in the lore is a legitimate win. And the only individual at that time that can beat Palpatine in a blade-to-blade duel as a Jedi is Yoda. It is not Windu.
Blade-to-blade duel. Bro, Yoda and Sidious were using the Force against each other more than they were fighting with lightsabers. Let's be honest here. And of course they were matching each other with Yoda's Ataru-based combat and that before, but then it turned into a reversal of Dooku versus Yoda, where they started off mostly with lightsabers going into the Senate chambers, and then it turned into using Force powers against each other before Yoda acknowledged that he was too strong for him. So Yoda acknowledged that Sidious was too strong for him, and so he had to leave. I think the novel gives a good insight into the way that it would have gone. It just depends on who writes it and the intent of the authors, where George may... I don't know where George has said that it was intended to be a defeat. It'd be nice to see a source for that, like everything else with this channel. But the actual lore, unless it's different in new canon, which I hate that I have to make the distinction now anyway. Still, 10 years later, I hate that I have to make the distinction. Anyway, that gives a good enough answer that it really... The Shatterpoint was Anakin there. He may have found another Shatterpoint, but who knows what would have happened if the fight went on longer.
And again, we've covered extensively, Yoda is superior with the blade to Palpatine, but Palpatine is superior in the Force. And, you know, maybe Palpatine has learned his lesson about Windu getting a little bit too powerful and letting the fight go on a little bit too long to the point where he's able to perfect Vapad.
Vapad was already perfected as such. It just had a massive dark side boost, which he would not get from another opponent because of the massive amount of dark side energy Palpatine has.
But he's not going to make that mistake again.
Don't forget, I put Mace Windu above Yoda as far as lightsaber combat. Don't forget that Windu created Vapad. And yes, over generations, maybe forms can be fine-tuned, but none of his apprentices stayed with the light side after using Vapad. But that shows an ingenuity and a proficiency in lightsaber combat that, yes, Yoda might be good at most of the forms and really mastered it over his years, but, I mean, Yoda's not in his prime. Windu would be in his prime, and he's a master duelist. I don't recall Windu being as proficient with the Force, and that's where sort of the strengths and weaknesses come in, where I think Windu was better with lightsaber combat, but then Yoda was better overall in the Force, and he had mastered the lightsaber forms over his years, but he's old now, so.
But it is my headcanon, Mace Windu incredibly powerful. Maybe the second, third most powerful Jedi at this point in time. The only rival being Anakin Skywalker, and of course, his better in Yoda. But my headcanon is that he threw the duel. I mean, what do you think was your overarching headcanon and opinion?
For the longest time, I believed that Mace Windu had truly won that fight, and that was a stance I held for most of my teenage years. Once I understood exactly how Vapad worked, and I started getting more into the actual lore of lightsaber combat, I was like, oh yeah, no, totally Mace Windu got that fight. But it was when I started realizing just how powerful Palpatine really is that I started realizing, no, I'm pretty sure Palpatine threw that fight. Even if it's not Lucas canon, like we've said before, we can't underestimate Palpatine's knowledge of the Force and how just strikingly brilliant he was as a tactician.
So I was really hoping that he'd have the opposite opinion so you could have a discussion between the two sides here. So let's go I thought, okay, cool, I can meet in the middle and go there. I'm of the other way. It's in, sorry, they do have opposing opinions. It's getting late for me. My brain's not working. No, they have the same opinion. My brain's having a moment. Need to buffer. Alright. Long video. It's like 2 a.m. in the morning now. But we're here for the reactions. The same opinion. It would have been good to have a discussion between someone that thinks the other way around. To bring a bit of variety to the topic. That's just what I'd say. I'd try and bring it on. If I was doing a discussion like this, I'd try and bring on someone that, when you know what the topic is, you go, let's have at least one person that thinks the opposite way to what I do type thing.
I mean, the most compelling argument for this case is that he is a master manipulator. I mean, George Lucas compares him to the devil himself, and he knows how to manipulate all situations to his favor. Even the novelization did this clever thing where he hit a recording device and pretended to be helpless and frightened as the Jedi, quote-unquote, unfairly arrest him.
So he actively said that he read the novel, right? And then we did see the excerpt of the novel. Where that's where I'm thinking that it's one that's undecided, and it's good to have discussion about speculating where it would have gone afterwards if Anakin hadn't turned up. But they seemed evenly matched in lightsaber combat. But I reckon that Palpatine is so powerful that he didn't throw the fight. He was surprised at that moment, but he knew he had a contingency plan for if he was defeated when the Jedi found him, and that was Anakin coming in. But let's say his contingency plan didn't work out. I think he would have pulled a 180 on Windu, because he'd already destroyed the glass. All he'd need was to catch Windu off guard once to knock him out the window.
And then, that he just knows how to turn all situations to his favor. So even if not on a basis of force powers, even if Windu could best him in lightsaber combat, he was definitely directing that situation, in my opinion, in order to draw out Anakin's dark feelings. Because Anakin was balancing right on the knife's edge, right? He was almost there, but still heavily conflicted.
Yeah, that's the thing of it's the same thing he tried to do with Luke. The problem is he couldn't whisper into Luke's ear for 10 years, a bit more, 13 years.
All he needed was just a little push. And that push comes in the form of revealing, or, quote unquote, revealing the Jedi Order's hypocrisy, which Mace Windu, being a ideological counterpart to Anakin his whole life, it was honestly just the perfect scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way you put it, that no one in that room is not there without Palpatine's consent, which is,
Yeah.
Which is a horrific thought. I guess my only counter to that, playing devil's advocate, would be, does Palpatine underestimate Mace Windu, and does that fight escalate to a point where it is beyond his control based on his own hubris, which I would say is extremely possible.
It is possible, and we can actually look to the Revenge of the Sith novelization to kind of learn what might have been happening in that room at the time. This was another thing I decided to look towards after I stopped looking behind the scenes and decided to look for a definitive answer in lore. And the best place to do that was right in the novel. And the novel is not from Palpatine's perspective. It never switches to what he's thinking. The novel treats him more like a force of nature and everyone reacting to him. And so we know from Windu's perspective that when he sinks deeply into Vapad and he just kind of gives himself into it, he is able to, like we've talked about earlier, realize Vapad's full potential against the pure darkness that is Palpatine. But from Windu's perspective, he says that even by giving his all into Vapad, it was only enough to match Palpatine's power, not overcome him. For the majority of that fight, they were stalemated.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was pointing out earlier, and that's where I think that because Mace is so specialised in Vapad, he was going to be on a downhill battle after a certain point in time, even if they evenly fought for ages.
Because Palpatine is essentially fighting against his own power.
That's
how it works.
Yeah, the novel put it like they created a loop between each other. Like,
yep.
They completed like a circuit.
Yeah, a superconductive loop, as we've described in countless videos. That's so fascinating. One thing that I think people get wrong, or rather misinterpret, about Vapad is that this is really the only time where the lightsaber form is perfected. This is the...
Well, yeah, because if you're talking about lightsaber form, before he goes on more, lightsaber forms are movements and technique a lot of the time. But his lightsaber combat that he created was specifically made to feed off the dark side and respond to it with an amp. So if you're talking about the time when it would be most powerful. I think that's a little bit different to perfecting a technique in lightsaber combat. But for the sake of, I guess, it being the best Vapad ever was, that's the time that it was just before he died.
Only time where it is taken to a degree where Vapad has reached its limit. And the only reason that's possible is because Palpatine is the epitome and embodiment of the dark side. Now, when Vapad, encounters that charge, as the novel puts it, that's when the circle can be complete.
I guess I would pronounce it Vapad, but I don't know, I've called it Vapad for so long, I think it sounds better.
Which is just wonderfully written, The Revenge of the Sith novelization is an incredible, piece of literature. I love it so much.
I mean, even George Lucas, his opinion on the novel was he really liked it because the novelization actually included a lot of moments that were cut from the original screenplay. So he actually appreciated the novel because of that, and he considered it to be pretty faithful to canon lore.
That's.
He never said canon. Look through all his quotes. He never said canon. And when you're talking about canon lore now, you're talking about new canon, which is separate to the lore that was created before. But those deleted scenes in the Revenge of the Sith novel, by the way, would not be canon to the new canon. Because when they came out and said about it, they said, all the parts that line up with the movie are canon, but all the extra bits aren't. Which basically means that the novel's not canon, only the movie's canon. And but he lines up so much with George Lucas's view on things. And as they admitted, he read the novel, and he really liked it, and he worked really closely with Matthew Stover on what would be included and what wouldn't. So certain deleted scenes like Shark T's death are not in there because Shark T didn't die in Revenge of the Sith.
It's incredible. The thing that I also want to touch back on that I found really interesting is what you said earlier about previous cuts depicting Anakin giving Palpatine his lightsaber. And a lot of fans have criticized before that scene because they use that as an example of it not being very well thought out. I don't know if you've seen that argument before, but I've not. Why is Palpatine holding Anakin's lightsaber hilt? That doesn't make sense. But now this makes perfect sense. The fact that Anakin would make the decision to save Palpatine's life, likely in a moment where he wasn't in his utmost peril that would follow. And I just think that's so interesting that Anakin's turn was so much more proactive in different versions of Revenge of the Sith.
It's interesting because there's completely different ways things would play out. Because in the version where Anakin gives him his lightsaber, Palpatine wouldn't have hidden the lightsaber in his office and would have just been having Anakin going along. But the dynamic, I guess, in the final cut where George Lucas had the distrust of Mace with Anakin and that build up and that not trusting him quite enough because he wants to make sure that what he said is true, is much more impactful for the movie in the final version.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm only halfway.
There were several different cuts of that fight scene. There was like a version where Mace Windu had his arm cut off but was still defending himself with one arm. There was a version where he collapsed down on the floor instead of flying out the window. There was a version where he even dueled with Anakin shortly before Palpatine took over and force lightninged him. I mean, there was a lot of different ideas that were circulating for that before they
It's probably something that they had to see and see how it felt and what the impact was at that moment.
Ended with the final product.
That's incredible. So, talking back about the novelization, you briefly refreshed it, and the novel gives us a firm answer as to exactly how Mace Windu is able to disarm Palpatine. Now, as you pointed out, and how I want to reiterate, it doesn't say Palpatine didn't throw the duel because we're not in his head ever.
Correct.
But it does offer us an explanation
That face.
as to exactly what Mace Windu is able to use to his advantage to tip the scales, to break the loop, and to get him the victory. Do you want to sort of fill them in and what that factor is that allows Windu to win? Or,
Yeah, absolutely.
Break the duel?
So basically the way the fight is going is Mace Windu is falling deeply into Vapad, doing everything he can to meet Palpatine's blows. And at this point in the novel, Palpatine is literally just described as a black storm wielding a meter of fire. That's the only way Anakin is even able to see him. He can't see Palpatine because he's moving so fast. And he's just a torrent of dark side energy. And Anakin senses Mace Windu in this moment actually let go of all of his Jedi restraint in order to actually keep up with him. I want to be very clear. He didn't say that Mace Windu was using the dark side, but he was just letting go of the compassion and restraint needed to keep Vapad in the Jedi way. And he was going full in with his passion and his desire for victory. So they're in this storm of fighting, and from Windu's perspective, he's trying to search for the shatter point, the weakness in Palpatine's style, because he's looking for any way to tip the scales. And he finds this point, this focal point of fear, and he believes that it's Palpatine's fear. So he draws upon that fear and was able to just put that, like, tip his power right over the edge in order to disarm Palpatine. But when he has Palpatine on the floor, it's later revealed that it was not Palpatine's fear that he sensed, but Anakin's.
That's, yeah, wow. So Windu is able to draw upon the energy and the darkness, fear leading to the dark side from Anakin. And he uses that to just tip the scales ever so slightly and break off the duel. So if Anakin is not there, theoretically, with no interference, the duel could go on essentially eternally.
That is what the novel stated, as I showed. Interesting how that works. It's interesting because a lot of this does line up with what's shown, and I think they did read the novel and stuff well, so that's good. At the start they were going, okay, they believe Anakin, they believe Sidious through.
Which is something that I find very interesting.
That is exactly what the novelization says. After it says that they reached a stalemate, the novel then goes on to say that neither one of them had sustained any wounds and that the fight could have gone on indefinitely from that point.
And that also supports the idea that it was only Palpatine's mask that dropped. It wasn't any actual damage to his flesh.
Something that I would like to point out, something that's interesting. We know that Palpatine is a character that is not necessarily fearless. We know that he holds legitimate fear for people, for situations. We know that he held intense fear of Luke Skywalker, for example. And we can see in the film Revenge of the Sith that he holds a legitimate amount of fear in moments of the duel with Yoda.
Right, yeah.
So he is capable of feeling that. So the fact that essentially he had no fear when dueling Mace Windu is a little bit more of a credit to the fact that Palpatine did actually throw that fight because, of course, he could sense fear, but at no point in the duel could Mace Windu sense that he had any fear for him directly through Palpatine, which, again, I think adds a little bit more precedence to the fact that Palpatine may have thrown that fight. Do you have anything?
I don't think throwing is the right word. Palpatine probably had confidence that he probably worked out enough about Vapad, like he learned enough about Vapad to know that it wouldn't be able to surpass him without a third party. involved that would give it more strength, because it mainly uses his own dark side energy against him, and he knew he could handle that. And it's only when Anakin came in that things changed, and then he knew that he could manipulate Anakin, because he'd been manipulating him over 13 years. I believe 13 years is correct. Should be. Hey. Actually, let's go. Yeah, 13 years, that's good. I was just double checking that I remembered correctly.
Thoughts on that?
You know, it's kind of interesting that there were several Jedi that Palpatine really wanted to shove it to. And I know that Mace Windu was specifically someone that he desperately wanted to present his power. Because so many times in the Book of the Sith, he responds to a lot of Mace Windu's comments, and Mace Windu's like discrediting the Sith and talking about how their ways are useless and all this other stuff. And Palpatine is continuously like just insulting him for that. And we've talked about this before, how Mace Windu unintentionally represents the dogma of the Jedi at that time. And even though Yoda was Palpatine's rival and the person he considered to be his light side counterpart, I think that Palpatine just hated Mace Windu, man. He just wanted nothing more than to just shove it down his throat.
I think Palpatine's hate of Windu would be the same as what Anakin sees in Windu, is the hypocrisy of, like, at least Yoda sticks to the Jedi way through thick and thin. And that's what he does. And yet Windu spouts the Jedi stuff, but when push comes to shove, he lets go of the Jedi restraints. And his lightsaber form is not aligned with the views of the Jedi. So Sidious could at least respect, in a way, better Yoda than Windu.
Powerful the dark side was. And I really think that his hatred would have overridden any fear or even worry that he would have had when fighting Mace Windu. I don't think that there was a single doubt in Palpatine's mind that if he wanted to, he could absolutely destroy Mace Windu.
Until he gets to that moment, yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's fascinating that Windu represents the giant hubris of the Jedi.
Yeah, but also I think the moment when Palpatine may have been a little bit surprised at how powerful Windu is was when he had to drop the mask. But that could also have been, there's another discussion, an intentional act, because he sensed Anakin coming. And so he wanted to appear like the Jedi taking over and weakened and all that to get sympathy from Anakin.
Because he's so much more arrogant than any other Jedi character besides Anakin that we know. Yoda is not an arrogant individual. He's just not. He's arrogant in terms of like what he represents, but personality-wise, Palpatine and Yoda don't necessarily clash. In fact, they find themselves able to like have conversations that are, you know, a little bit less jabby than him and Mace Windu, Palpatine and Mace Windu. But I get that interpretation as well, that like Palpatine hates this man and Anakin hates this man, and they bond over him being the representation of everything that's wrong with the Jedi.
And Palpatine would have been pushing Anakin specifically. That's a good point. Palpatine would have been manipulating Anakin to specifically see the hypocrisy in Windu, because he knew that Windu would be the front line that would be leading the charge to attack him if he found out that he was a Sith Lord.
And that's not to add precedence to the fact that the Sith aren't, you know, they're definitely wrong. They're definitely the villains, but the Jedi are arrogant, and it's almost frustrating to them how powerful Windu is.
And see, the point in that as well is that he made sure that Yoda was away on Kashyyyk at the time when he told Anakin, and then Anakin would have told Windu. So he knew Windu would lead the charge because he was the most senior member there.
With all of his arrogance and the arrogance of the Jedi, he is the epitome of the man that they want to utterly destroy. And that hatred I can definitely see blinding Palpatine to fear. And another thing we should point out is Palpatine has always respected Yoda. We've said before, he acknowledges power wherever he can find it. He can disagree with it. Yeah, he disagrees with it philosophically, but he definitely respects what Yoda possesses. And in Palpatine's mind, Yoda is the ultimate enemy, and he is the equal, or near equal. I shouldn't say equal. He is the counter. But Mace Windu isn't looked at with that respect at all from Palpatine.
Yoda, yeah, that's another point to add on to that, is that Yoda has his own power that he's gained through years of training, and it's from the light side, whereas Vapad borrows power from the dark side, turning it back against the user that he's fighting.
He is looked at as a fool who wields a power that he does not deserve, and second that Palpatine is able to shatter the illusion of superiority, he wants to, and that is his motivation.
I really feel like that when it comes to the saber, I would be willing to concede that they would stalemate, and maybe, it's true that Windu probably used Anakin's fear to tip the scales just enough to disarm Palpatine. But in any other realm, especially the Force, Palpatine just mops Windu. Like, I feel like if the fight had gone on legitimately, I think it would have taken a turn much similar to how it did with Yoda, where he would have either put away his lightsaber or allowed himself to be disarmed so that he could fall back on his Force power and just, ragdoll Windu.
He'd already turned to Force powers, starting with the lightning that Windu was trying to arc back at him. So he was already starting that, and then he probably would have just done something to the side as he was lightning Windu, because Windu's focusing so much on blocking the lightning that he wouldn't be able to block like a flying object coming towards him from the side, or he'd have to shift his lightsaber to defend and get fried by the lightning.
Or, do some sort of Sith spell or use his Force lightning to dismantle him.
It is important to note, though, that Vapad, although it is a lightsaber form, it does have that same ability in the Force as well, and that is why Windu is able to channel the dark side through his lightsaber again in the form of Force lightning and attack him. So we don't really know.
The way that's described is a bit odd. It's more like he redirected the lightning back towards Palpatine.
What it would look like if Palpatine solely fell back on Force abilities, if Windu would be able to, continue to use Vapad. But I absolutely get what you're alluding to and what you're getting at. There's no debate that Palpatine in the lore is more powerful than Windu, but we just don't know the intricacies of Vapad, and it doesn't seem like anytime soon we're going to either, because it's just noted slightly that Luke may have known the ability, but it's never explicitly ever written anywhere. So
something from the previous video as well of like, what am I thinking of? I lost my train of thought, damn it. I'll go back for 10 seconds and see.
Because it's just noted slightly that Luke may have...
The intricacies of Vapad, because Vapad was a brand new lightsaber form. Mentioned in a previous video when I was talking about Nomi Sunrider having much more experience fighting Sith. That's something that would have made Vapad much weaker in this time period was that there was no Sith to fight against, really, to push the limits of Vapad and really stress test it and refine it down to an even better level, especially with the way that the dark side loop worked and the way that it pushed dark side energy back at an opponent. Especially since it's only a single human generation and only Mace Windu that's been able to master it. No one else has been able to. And even then, it's like up in the air. Even if Windu had won, would he still have been in the light side, or would he have fallen to the dark side?
Known the ability, but it's never explicitly ever written anywhere, so Mace Windu sort of it.
Yeah, I really think that Vapad is a very powerful lightsaber form, and like you accurately pointed out, it transcends beyond just two combatants meeting in a duel, and does transcend into the realm of the Force. We saw Windu repel and reflect Palpatine's lightning back at him. I mean, that's not normal. And so I don't know exactly how far Vapad would carry one if it did fall back into literally Force versus lightsaber. I don't anticipate that Windu would last very long. I think that he would last a lot longer than the normal Jedi, but there would come a point where Palpatine would just overwhelm him with his Force power.
And there would be a certain level of Force power that he's able to redirect versus not. I would imagine there is a limit somewhere there.
Yeah, you're probably right. So, I want to sort of break it down in our closing.
Yeah.
A few different ways you guys can choose to look at this duel. We can look at it from the perspective of Lucas said that Palpatine lost to Mace Windu and that it's legitimate. That is a legitimate argument yourself. You can fall to the fact of the novelization is very vague. We don't get any insight into Palpatine's thoughts. We don't get any insight into whether he throws the duel intentionally or not. It is up in the air and it is undecided. You can take the novel, you can say that Mace Windu took Anakin's fear and defeated Palpatine using that legitimately, and that they were stalemated and equals up until that point. Or you can take the stance of you can look at the lore, you can see how powerful Palpatine is, you can take into account that everything is planned, and that he threw the duel intentionally to get Anakin on his side. Something that I like to think about with the lore is, and I don't want to discredit the power of Windu or the effectiveness of Vapad, is that Palpatine does make a mistake in the duel, and that is letting the duel progress for too long. You get the intention in the film that Palpatine has opportunities to strike down Windu if he's quick enough. There's a moment in the duel where he holds his lightsaber directly at the chest of Windu, and Windu's lightsaber's to the side. His guard has been dropped, and you get the impression that if he drives through as hard as he can, that he can catch Windu there. But what I like to think happened is that Palpatine allowed it to go on for too long, that allowed Mace Windu to fall into Vapad, to abandon the code of the Jedi, to abandon the restraints of the Jedi, and completely embrace his power, and that Palpatine has a moment in the duel where he realizes that that may have been a mistake. But that he also chooses to throw it to Anakin in the end when he senses him, and use this as a golden opportunity. That is...
And I'm pretty sure he would have been confident in that Anakin was turning up, so he wanted to be there to be able to have that moment to fully turn Anakin to the dark side. That would have been his master plan. And he would have been confident that he can survive more, because he was then experiencing Vapad, and then as he went on, he would have been learning more about it firsthand as well. And he was keeping up. It was at this point when he knew that Anakin was coming. When he knew, oh good, I will have my moment to turn him to the dark side and call him Darth Vader.
My interpretation.
Maybe this is just coming from me because I'm a huge Sidious fanboy, but I'm not gonna say that of course, Palpatine's not infallible. He's going to make mistakes. He's going to have a few oversights, as you pointed out. But man, this is a guy who doesn't just think a few steps ahead of everybody else. He thinks 10 years before everybody else. I mean, this is a guy who made sure that his plans were meticulously laid out, not just for the Clone Wars, not just even for the fall of the Jedi, but for the rise of the Empire and his plans for what the Empire would be and do. I can't, with what I know about Palpatine as a character, I don't think there's any part of me that could accept that he wouldn't plan out to lose perfectly at the moment of Anakin's entry in order to tip him over the edge so that he could make him Darth Vader.
I think I totally see what the novel puts out, is that they were on even footing in lightsaber combat for all that time. And maybe it was Windu being caught up in it that I don't know if the choreography in the film really depicts the original intention either. If that particular moment where it looks like he may have been able to step forward and kill Windu would really have been the intention for George to show on that. Or if that's just part of the flair of the choreography compared to how it's described in the novel.
Right. This argument is a superconductive loop of energy. There is no...
Oh my gosh, you're right.
There is no right or wrong interpretation. It is just an endless argument that we will be having forever. Unfortunate.
But both of these guys agree on the same point of view. So I am curious if any of you guys that may be watching disagree with them. Do you think that Windu beat that Windu beat Palpatine properly in this fight at this point in time? I could see the argument for it because I look at the novel and I think they were on pretty even footing because of the part and the loop. But I don't think that Palpatine even hesitated for a second as soon as he knew Anakin was coming. And if Anakin had decided on the way to turn back, I'm pretty sure Palpatine would have got the upper hand.
Or fortunately.
That's actually honestly pretty rare in Star Wars, because a lot of times with the lore, depending on how you structure your argument, there can and usually is a definitive answer for most debates, but this is one of those that just honestly just doesn't have an answer.
It truthfully does not have a definitive answer. And we can choose as fans to let that make us angry and to weaponize it, or we can just sort of listen, absorb others' interpretations, absorb others' points, and have a good time with it, which is what I like to do. Because, we have different interpretations of the duel. That's fine. That's great. It opens avenues for discussions like this one that make it interesting. So that's all I have to say, man. I think we both said how we felt. We laid out the arguments for all sides, and our answer is inconclusive, definitively.
Wise insight, Master. Very wise.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys, if you have stayed this long. We really appreciate you, and we'll continue to make more discussions. And thank you again to the Archivist. You guys have really been showing him a lot of love in the comments, and he's doing a great job,
too.
Much. So we do read them, and we do appreciate it. And if you guys want other discussion topics, please request them. This was a request from an acolyte, in the comments. They wanted to see this. So let us know, and we'll play around with it and maybe make a discussion about it. But as always, my friends and fellow acolytes of the Force, thank you for joining us today in our discussion, and may the Force be with you always.
May the Force be with you. See you next time.
So, I think there would be that you can see that there's definitive answers for as far as what was intended to happen. Like nothing was not... Everything was going to go to plan for Palpatine to start with. But it is interesting to debate who would have won if it kept going longer. But I think if... This video is an EU lore answer video because it draws upon the Revenge of the Sith novel. Well, I like this discussion video. I think this was actually good. Unlike some of the other lore videos that they've done that may have some inaccuracies and stuff in it, it seems like they actually read most of the, at least, source material and stuff and actually tried to have a good discussion about it. I just feel like they should have had someone that is in the other camp, because I don't at the moment see how someone would think that Windu had realistically defeated them all, even if it was like, oh yeah, creators George Lucas said that he won. It's like, okay, but if you're separating the art from the artist, and then what George approved with the Revenge of the Sith novel and surrounding lore, George has changed his mind a lot, and I think that's a big thing that people forget. Or rather, like to ignore, because it's easier not to think of it that way.